Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our continuing coverage of PSIfest 2023 from Charlottesville, Virginia, here with the International Remote Viewing Association and Monroe Institute. Our guest right now is the indomitable Jon Knowles. He is the author of Remote Viewing from the Ground Up, as well as numerous books. He was here giving a presentation on remote viewing of UAPs, UFOs, things like that. Before we get into that very, very hot topic right now, Jon, how did you come to the remote viewing world to begin with? Because I always love hearing people's journey, especially to a topic like this.
Sure.
It's such a mind-opening topic, and such an open-minded topic.
Right.
So how did you find remote viewing to begin with, and how did you get involved with the field?
Yeah, I was in a bookstore and I saw a book called Natural ESP by Ingo Swann, and I bought it and took it home, read it, and I thought I'd try it. A remote view. He didn't call it remote viewing in the book, but it was basically remote viewing.
Sure.
So I tried it with my daughter and son, and it worked right away. But then I set it aside, the topic, for 10 years because we had young kids and the family, job, and everything. And then in 1999, I went to the New Science and Ancient Wisdom Conference in Berkeley, and there was a speaker there named Prudence Calabrese, and I heard her present on remote viewing. She was offering a course. I decided to take it, a 3-day course, and then I took a second course from her and joined their Banana Slam program, it was called.
Okay.
Yeah, and went through that very intensive 6-month course with remote viewing every day, repeatedly.
Wow.
Including for some actual client work. And then eventually I became the training coordinator for transdimensional systems, which had a successful business early on. This is like 1998 to 2003, approximately.
Okay.
And then they shut down in 2003, so I went on to other things in remote viewing.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. And were you ever... Did you ever consider yourself within the psychic realm in your life? Were you ever an intuitive or medium?
No, but I did have 2 paranormal experiences.
Oh, okay.
I would say.
What were those?
Okay, so the second one, which is easier to say, is that I was with a friend in their apartment, 2 friends, and they'd been trying to fix me up. I was a single man. And one of the fellow came home from work and said, "Oh, I saw Aggie today." And when he said the word Aggie, the walls started to vibrate, the ceiling started to do all of this, and I felt really small, and like something big was happening.
Ooh.
So I said, well, is Aggie a man or a woman? And he said it was a woman. I said, well, that's good. And so I've been married for 40 years to a woman named Aggie, the same one, of course.
Wow.
That he was referring to. So that was one paranormal experience.
Literally saw the earth shake.
From a word.
From a word.
Yeah, not even an image or anything,
Wow.
just a word. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
Yeah. The other experience was I was a youth, and I may be misremembering this, I'm not sure. I was just 5 years old, but I somehow remember it. And I was at a picnic with my parents, and there was a culvert with water in it, and I got in and started exploring, and it got deeper and deeper. And then I realized I was sort of bouncing up and down, and this is not good, maybe I'm going to drown. And what I remember is a woman in white appeared under the water and directed me up back to where I came from, and then my father reached down and pulled me out of the water. So again,
wow.
Who knows if that ever really happened, but it sort of made an impression on me.
Was that something that you carried your whole life, or was that something that you remembered later?
No, I remembered it all, I don't remember much from my childhood, but I certainly remember that.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm from a very materialist background. My parents were social liberals, to put it mildly. And so I was raised up in that materialist tradition of politics and spent a lot of years as a leftist political person. But in the last 25 years or so, I've been all about remote viewing.
Yeah, and do you think that your experience when you were younger with the paranormal, unrelated to remote viewing, kind of opened your mind, so to speak? Was that something that Were you curious about paranormal things like that throughout your life because of that experience?
I don't think so because of that one experience, but I was always open to, when science fiction was in its heyday in the 1950s and 60s, I was a teenager. I read all that stuff. There was the flap over Washington, D.C. in 1952.
Thank you. I bring that up all the time because people always say, it'll take a UFO landing on the White House lawn. I'm like, how about a fleet of them flying over it?
And reported. I didn't see them, but it was just reports.
They were all over the news. It was that was one of the things that made national news across the country. Headlines, front of papers, because the Air Force was on alert for weeks. Because of that. That was square in the middle of Cold War. We didn't know what was going on with that.
That's right.
And only about 15 years or so after the famed Battle of Los Angeles, where the military was literally shooting shells at a craft for hours. For hours, shelling this thing. And it's remarkable to see the change in attitude toward things, especially from the government.
Oh, my God.
And to see the want of accountability for this. One of the conversations I've had with numerous people is, and we were talking about this morning, to get away from the idea of little green men. Let's talk about accountability of our employees.
There you go. Right, the government.
If you
US
found out your
employees
were shifting money around since 1939, you'd just be okay with that?
Right.
Because that's what it's really about here. But when it comes to paranormal, and especially when it comes to UFO UAPs, a lot of the study recently, especially Hal Puthoff last year, spoke a little bit about that and about frequency shift and the idea of somebody being in a different frequency state may be what allows them to see it and not the person next to them.
You're talking about a blue shift or something of some kind.
I mean, even body vibrational shift. And I talk to a lot of experiencers on my show. And that is one thing that I bring up is many people come back with a different aspect, a different look. Some people come back with psychic powers, things like that. And when you're talking about that kind of high technology, things like that, you're talking about vibrational shift technology. So if somebody's in that field, surely they would be affected by that field,
absolutely.
By all means of physics. So how does remote viewing relate to the field of UFO UAP, John?
Well, in my presentation, I stressed a couple of things. One, that there's just an incredible number of remote viewers who've had UFO experiences, from abduction to seeing objects, to seeing lights in the sky, to getting burns. I just met a fellow this morning. I never, not in Joe McMonagle got burned.
Wow.
Joe McMonagle, 1965 or so, was on duty in the Caribbean, I believe it was. Anyway, there was a UFO overhead. He suffered minor burns. I guess his companion suffered more serious burns. And I met a guy this morning here at breakfast who said, I've never talked about this. Me and my wife, she was here too. In Belize, we had UFOs, that orbs and white balls that followed us around for 5 minutes. We got a video of it. So you talk, just scratch a remote viewer and you're going to find a UFO experience almost.
And even the work of Kathleen Martin with MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team. She is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill.
Okay, right.
She has worked with MUFON for years. Even her aunt, one of my favorite conversations with her is her aunt told her, like, this ever happens to you, honey, keep it to yourself. This ruined our life. And that's just it. Just about anybody coming forward with a report of that, I have a lot of books. I talk to a lot of people. It's rarely a good experience when it starts. You know? It can be frightening. It can be scary, as can an out-of-body experience, astral projection, anything like that. We were talking earlier about that realm just before astral projection, of that feeling of falling, that panic feeling that some people get as they're drifting off to sleep and like you're jerked awake suddenly. But if you can get past that feeling, that's where the astral projection starts. That's where different things can start happening. Is it that way with remote viewing, do you find? Are there barriers that get in the way?
Well, there are lots of barriers, I think, psychological barriers, traumas, and so forth, as well as just mainly your belief system. I mean, so many people, particularly from when I was a leftist, who just don't understand this stuff at all. And they just have a barrier, just like so many scientists have a barrier about it.
Yeah.
And I never had any barriers. I don't know why. Always, as soon as I learned about remote viewing, as well as UFOs, they made perfect sense to me. They're real. Let's explore it, So I probably have my own barriers, but I'm not sure what they are yet, as it were. But absolutely. So there's people in the field who try to remove barriers, psychological barriers. There's, of course, past life regressions, all kinds of stuff that people do of mixed quality and value, I think,
Sure.
So, and then, there's other barriers, like some people for a while were saying you really have to learn CRV, that's the only way to go. But now, fortunately, everybody's recognizing that any of the different methods, transdimensional systems, scientific remote viewing, TRV, anything like that works. But there's still a question of the definition of remote viewing, and I'm going to address that tomorrow in my second presentation.
Well, I don't want to ruin it for anybody that's here. Well, anybody that's here will be seeing this Tuesday. But let's get into that definition for a minute, because so many times, semantics can get in the way of understanding, but it can also get in the way of figuring out which form of remote viewing is for you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the definition, those of us who've been around like to focus on the protocols. First of all, it has to be intentional. Whatever you're doing has to be intentional. It can't be a spontaneous OBE or astral projection or something like that. It can't be some guy on the left side of my head who's telling me stuff, which a new person just said the other day. Is that, am I remote viewing? No, it's got to be intentional.
Yeah.
And traditionally in remote viewing, it also has to have a remote viewer, of course, who's tasker, and we have to have feedback. And then how blind, that is, how ignorant of the target is the viewer and any monitor to be. That's where it gets a little tricky. There's some people used to say, you have to have a viewer. It's intentional, of course. You have to have the viewer blind. Anybody in the room has to be blind, and you have to have feedback. Otherwise, it's not remote viewing. I think that's dead wrong. That's a narrow definition that some people held. The actual practice of remote viewing is what should determine how we define it. And all definitions, by the way, of course, just extract a few words from vast experiences.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's why I suggest that we tell folks new to the field who think that astral projection or scrying or anything or runes is remote viewing. No, it's the protocols, and only the intention and is the one that's required. The other three you may not get because it varies with the lab and in operations and so forth and in training. So that's what I'm going to address tomorrow.
Well, and I think especially here with, we were just talking about this with Michael Green, the bookstore guy, we have so many under 30s here at this conference. It's so amazing to see so many young people.
It's great.
And that has been something I brought up at so many conferences. MUFON.
Are they getting younger people too?
They're starting to.
Oh, good.
They're starting to.
Finally.
But like the example I give is, I'm a 4th degree Knight of Columbus. When I walk into a Knights of Columbus hall, I am treated like royalty.
Yeah, right.
It's like, look at this young blood. Like, young blood, I'm almost 50, Jack.
Right.
But I'm young blood to them.
Right.
And introducing this to new generations, that is what's going to carry the research on, because this is one of the few fields in the world of parapsychology, paranormal, that is quantifiably proven.
Yes, absolutely.
Through statistic, through lab work, there's 4 3-finger thick books over there of government documents that show this works.
We don't even try to convince the skeptics, right?
You can't not convince them.
Why? Do your reading, do your homework, and then let's talk.
Yeah, exactly. And and the one thing that I keep hammering home is, don't forget, quantum entanglement is it's the new
agnostic
stuff
on that.
The idea that two particles can influence each other despite distance, that's quite literally the root of how Puthoff's work just about that begat remote viewing. The idea that we can influence something even though we're not there.
Yeah, maybe, but there's a lot of debate about whether quantum mechanics really applies.
Sure.
and Hammeroff and Penrose, have the views about tubercles, microtubercles, and all that.
Yeah.
But others physicists say no, there's too much decoherence. It's in the human body. It's not going to happen. So I'm just agnostic until I, see facts and stuff.
Yeah.
It's suggestive, certainly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There, and of course, correlation is not causation.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's some pretty good correlation there. It's pretty interesting to see. And now, to come back to the idea of UFOs, UAPs, how do you? Because of course, like you're saying, there's feedback involved.
Yeah.
How do you handle the feedback part of a remote viewing session when it comes to something like UFO, UAP?
Well, when I was in transdimensional systems, for example, my teacher, Prue, said, why don't you remote view this particular UFO target? I said, well, is there any feedback? She said, no. I said, I don't want to do it. She said, what? So what I did do, though, in Oakland, California, in the 1890s, there were these flyovers, UFO flyovers, and the library had records of that stuff. So I'm going to look at the records. I'm going to assign some remote viewing tasks and see if we get some correlation there, because we have newspaper reports. We got,
Sure.
In other words, there was some feedback.
Feedback. There was concrete evidence
as
there.
Opposed to just talking to someone who says, "Oh, I saw lights in the sky." So that's when the few remote viewing UFO taskings I've done have been of that nature, where there's some kind of feedback. And if you don't do that, then it's all speculative,
Yeah, precisely. And, I've discussed it a few times on the show. As with you, I have some problems with some of that kind of remote viewing where somebody is given a scenario to go view, and it's like, how blind was that?
Yeah.
How blind was that? Because you're talking a lot of detail, to go view something. Like you're talking the circumstances of an incident, and I'm going to go view it now.
Yeah. But even Ingo Swann admits that he used front loading quite a bit when he was working with Harold Sherman, the psychic there. And others have said in operations there can be a lot of front loading. For example, in Russia, they had a remote viewer who used to sit in a tank, and other remote viewers were on the battlefield. So clearly they're front loaded with all kinds of stuff that's going on there. It's not like just saying the target's an object, describe the object, or the target's a location, describe the location. We're in a battlefield. We want to know, I guess, what the enemy's doing.
What the troop movements are,
stuff like that.
Yeah, where's the command base.
Yeah. So there's different degrees of front loading,
Sure. And explain front loading to the audience who may not understand what that concept is when it comes to remote
So front loading is when information is imparted to the remote viewer about the target. Ordinarily, the viewer might just get a TRN, a target reference number, like 5732-8199, and that's all the remote viewer gets.
So or a set of coordinates, for example.
Set of coordinates, that's the same. Or geographical coordinates is how they did it in the early days in Stanford Research Institute. But if you also, so that's how the targeting is done, and I'm forgetting what else you wanted me to address there. So
well, the front loading of information.
Oh, front loading, yeah. So that's what I said. That's if you get information other than saying, well, if you say the target, there's a target. The target's a location. Describe the location. That's front loading of a course. Of course, if you say the target is the Golden Gate Bridge, that's total front loading and ridiculous.
Yeah.
And some people even object to saying the target's the location. Front loading that way. So when we worked in transdimensional systems, we were just given the target reference number. We were given no information but in operations it can save time to tell them, hey, there's a troop movement here, we need to know about the troop movement, in actual operations. So
Sure.
Yeah, so there's a variety of front loading, and in operations it's very useful. In the lab, you probably don't want to have front loading. You want to have the viewer blind and also the experimenter blind. So
Absolutely, because at that point you're setting up for the full-on classification of that data at the end of it,
right?
Which is fantastic. And once again, there are reams and reams of data on this that statistically shows beyond chance.
And I just spent a weekend at the Stanford, the Edwin C. May Archives in Houston.
Oh, yeah.
Which are only there a few years ago, and there's 54 boxes of stuff, and we went through a lot of that. And plenty of it's not on the CIA online files,
Yeah.
They've released a ton of material.
Yeah, much of the work of Jacques Vallée is going to be going there. And it's really interesting to see that it's the Religious Studies Department of Rice University that started that archive.
It's Jeffrey Kripal, the guy who's been behind it.
And just the idea that, we've left this to a religious studies group because we're talking about information from all over the world, and when you're looking at it, it's going to be something that changes humanity in that way. There's a reason why NASA brought aboard 12 theologians and paid a group that had them in it to discuss the impacts of UFO UAP on humanity, because it will be a truth-changing thing. It will be a paradigm-changing thing.
Once this recent UFO stuff, if we get some real knowledge that they're here, but both UFOs and remote viewing go back in history. Nobody's saying that this is all original stuff.
Yeah.
Humanity's dealt with both of these subjects for
millennia.
Under names.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, what have been some of your experiences when remote viewing?
Some of my experiences? Well, I've had a lot of different ones. I've done, hundreds of operational sessions and thousands of other ones. So,
what's been your most interesting session you've done? Most interesting
session?
The one that resonates with you the most, that you carry the most?
I don't think I have one. I sometimes say, what's the most interesting target that I've been a project manager on? And I sometimes say it's the Oak Island situation, because that's been done by a bunch of different groups.
Okay, I can't let that go now, John.
Right.
I can't let that go. I talk with researchers from Curse of Oak Island on my show regularly, people like Gretchen Cornwall and things like that.
All right.
So what did you see when you went to Oak Island?
Well, these viewers have different takes, but there's, for example, Daz Smith, who's one of the best remote viewers, did a session where basically he's drawing the pit, and he's drawing the layers, and he's drawing what's in there. And there's a variety of data. Like, some people say, well, there's pirates involved. Others say the King of England. A few people say Shakespeare and all that. I mean, it comes out in the data, too. But it's clear that something really happened there that was not just a hole in a limestone-based island, which has lots of limestone there, right?
Yeah.
So, and of course now they've dug it up so much that God knows if they're ever going to extract something. But
well, and I belong to a lot of online communities, and I belong to a few acorn communities, as they're called, Okies. Acorns.
All right.
And a lot of people are upset. Oh, they're never going to find anything. It's like, I think you've missed the gold they have found. Like, the things they've found have actually changed the history of the area.
Well, they found a Maraveda coin, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But that could have been through the trades,
It could have been, but it's at least showing the fact that the layers of earth it's in, that's somebody was there with that kind of coin in their pocket that long ago, where you were knocking a piece of silver off an ancient Roman coin. There's been lead that traces back to France from the 15th century, like time of the Templars, and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to see the changes of that, and it's remarkable that you were one of the individuals that actively remote viewed Oak Island. That's pretty cool.
Well, I try to find projects that like that are topical and that people are really interested in. Yeah. Some people have been remote viewing a little bit this Skinwalker Ranch, but I haven't heard the results of that.
I would be interested in that. One of the things that we have a large community of folks who listen to this show that are targeted individuals, as they are called, people who have reported Havana syndrome type symptoms for decades. Claiming to be gang stalked by people, claiming that things on their computers are changed, all kinds of things, to the point that it affects and ruins lives, John. And that's been one of the things I've been considering is, let's start tasking some remote viewers with a couple cases to see maybe if we can find out some of this technology that's being used. Maybe we can find out a location that targeting is coming from. Things like that. To try and find any kind of... I mean, one of the things I try to do with this show is, diffuse misinformation and misunderstanding about topics like this, and separating the difference between psychic and remote viewing, between clairvoyance and remote viewing, scrying, like you're saying, and remote viewing, because they're very similar. There's some similar aspects, getting yourself into the meditative state, things like that. Even when you talk about Nostradamus' practices and how he did it, a candle in front of a water bowl that he's tapping with a stick to create ripples. Like,
really? Okay.
That's going to give you the same visual effect in your brain as a binaural beat. Like it's going to transfix you and change your brainwave pattern watching that, So interesting to see some of the similarities, but it's totally different. It's entirely different.
Well, the protocol makes it different. And what the saying in the field is, I don't care if you stand on your head and whistle Dixie as your method. That's... As long as you're following the protocols, you're doing remote viewing.
Whatever it takes you to get there, whatever, as long as you're following the protocols along the way. And once again, I think your talk tomorrow is going to be very important in that way, especially for a lot of the folks that this is their first conference, this is their introduction to remote viewing, because that can be very obfuscated and it can be very confusing and it can actively, unfortunately, discourage some people from wanting to take part in remote viewing or study the science. Because it is a science.
Well, no, I don't think it's a science.
You don't think so?
No. Somebody, has this so-called scientific remote viewing. I think the way to put it is that a lot of scientific experiments have been done at Stanford Research Institute. But because we don't know the foundations of this science, we don't know how it works, really. We don't know how we get the information. So that's why I refuse to call it a science.
I can see your reasoning in that, because unless we know unless we know force equals mass times acceleration.
Something like that.
We don't know the causality behind what's happening.
And we ain't got none of that yet.
And hopefully we'll be getting there through some of the new things that are coming out.
Hal Puthoff was once asked, do you understand how remote viewing works? What's your best guess? He said, my best guess is that I don't have a clue. So if he said that, the guy who ran the Stargate program,
the generator of things,
and a physicist, So
well, and that's one of the things I've been bringing up regularly. Is this is one of the fields where you see a lot of letters, and commas behind people's names in this field. As opposed to a lot of parapsychological fields, a lot of paranormal fields. You don't see as many doctors in a lot of those fields as you do in this
I see what you're saying.
There's a lot of
Somebody
academia.
was commenting on the people here,
There is a lot of academia involved in this field, man.
Like the guy who was leading the conga at the party last night has a PhD in physics from Michigan.
Exactly.
Who knew?
Exactly. Precisely. And to see people of that academic ilk looking at this as not fringe, looking at this as not pseudo,
Absolutely.
This is a statistically provable thing, and it is fascinating.
We're also getting a flood of people finally coming into the field after 20 years. For example, discourse on Reddit. So Reddit has now 60,000 people who join. Not that they're all going to become remote viewers, because most people who get into the field, even if they train, they just drop out because it does take time. And then the discourse within Reddit has 2,000 members, and there's 2 Facebook groups with 10,000 and 5,000 members. But so finally we're getting traction, I guess you could say.
And as we kind of wrap things, because I know I'm just keeping you here for 30 minutes. You've been very busy talking with folks, things like that.
I appreciate it.
What can people do? Because the one thing I've heard from people that I know that have studied remote viewing that left was they got very discouraged. They got very discouraged with their results, and maybe they did not have a good coach. They may not have had a good tasker in that right, somebody who can really give them good feedback, that kind of stuff. I know that is hugely important. What should somebody who is looking to study remote viewing be looking for? Because there are tons of online courses, there's tons of video series and everything else. How can somebody avoid the snake oil out there, John?
Well, I'd say a few things. First, if you're really seriously interested in the field, check yourself. Do you really have an intention that you're going to be able to devote months to this, not just a few days? Recognize that perhaps 1% of the population can get really good at this, just like piano. Everybody can play the piano a little bit, but very few people can be Liszt or somebody, Chopin. Recognize that that's a factor. Motivation and intention is just central to it. There's something called remoteviewing.link, a website, remoteviewing.link, which has all kinds of websites to go to get background information, the lists of trainers, targets, all books and everything. I recommend going to that. Try out some of the different trainers in terms of looking at what they do and their reputations before you sign up with one. You can actually train yourself in natural remote viewing, but if you try control remote viewing or any of the offshoots of that, then it's better to have a trainer. And fortunately now remote viewing is spreading into like Germany and South America and other countries. The International Remote Viewing Association is finally taking up the task of making the I in their name international real. So that's happening too. So if you're in a foreign country, check out, see if that's starting to happen. And just go by reputation. There's a lot of people who've discovered remote viewing now and say, "Oh, I can teach that. Maybe I can make some money." So you have to avoid new people if they don't have a track record. Make sure they have a track record in terms of maybe publishing books, training, students who vouch for them, and so forth. So there's maybe 6 or 7 trainers that are worth training with.
And where can everybody go to not only get your books, but where can they go to follow your work, keep up with everything that you were doing, Jon?
I have a portal, a website that has a portal to my books and so forth. It's mprv.com or .net, I forget which actually. And also in my books, there's other indications of where to. But I'm not super active right now. I'm writing books. I'm pretty old. I'm sort of retiring, on the verge of retirement. So I'm sort of try to help younger folks to get acquainted with the field and stuff like that.
It is hugely important, and that's just it. Once again, the idea of new blood, bringing new people in, passing this on to the next generation, who will take up the torch of Hal Puthoff, Len Buchanan.
Because they're all getting older.
It's moving on in all of these fields. In every one of them, it's got to be passed on to the new interested investigators and scientists.
We're getting some of that.
And it's nice to see it. It's fantastic to see it. It's great to see a conference that is about 3 times larger than last year.
Oh, was it?
Oh, I mean, it was well attended last year, but the facility here is much more amenable and it fits a lot more people. And it's a full room in there.
It is,
it is wide ranging in age. It's fantastic. So, Jon, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. While you were online getting your copy of Remote Viewing from the Ground Up by Jon Knowles, make sure to stop on by CuriousRealm.com. CuriousRealm.com/store is where you can find all the books from our guests. CuriousRealm.com/story is where you can share your experience of the paranormal or remote viewing session. Or if you are a government whistleblower, you can contact us there. We will present your case to our experts and try to get you some answers. Hold on through this commercial break, folks. When we come back, we will have the conclusion of our second day of coverage live from PSIfest 2023 here in Charlottesville, Virginia, with the International Remote Viewing Association and Monroe Institute, right after this.